This is a proud member of the Philippine Podcast Directory. Check us out on Facebook and listen to the amazing lineup of local podcasters this country has to offer. Find your audience with Podmetrics, your one-stop shop for podcast analytics, and it's absolutely free. Create an account and put in my code, Coach Franco Says, upon sign up. It's that easy. Enjoy the features and thank me later. But wait, there's more! Podmetrics has teamed up with Lazada to make your shopping a lot easier and safer. There are links in the comment section on what I use to make content, and you can support this channel, please, by purchasing those items with the links provided. Now, let's get to today's episode.
Definitely. I'm just very, very happy to learn. It's a very interesting concept. So, Jose Decolongon on the show, thank you so much for doing this. And let's put everything into context, and please introduce yourself first. What do you do? How you came about futures thinking?
All right. So thanks a lot, Franco. It's a pleasure to be here, and thanks for inviting me. So basically, I teach futures thinking. I'm a professor at the Asian Institute of Management. So there's a master's in innovation and business there. So this year, the head of that program decided to include futures thinking as part of the courses. And I was lucky enough to be able to ask to teach. So it's a fairly new course. It's actually, I think it's the first course to be offered in a formal institution and a formal education institution. So in a way, the field it's nothing new. This has been, I think since the 1960s in its current state. Although when we think about the future, if you think about, the in the olden times where you had the oracles, mga manghuhula,
mga shaman,
shaman,
magicians, yan. Okay.
Exactly. Like those were like the first wave of thinking. When it comes of when you think about futures thinking. But now in our modern times, when you think about futures thinking, it's really about being able to come up with different scenarios of the future, not just one future, because normally when we think about the future, it's just one. But if you think about, if you relate it to, what's a good example, like if you saw Avengers Endgame, right? And Doctor Strange talking about 14 million something.
So Doctor Strange, he played out the entire scenario. Okay.
Right, diba? He was talking about 14 million plus possible futures. So as a profession, as a field of study, we don't really come up with 14 million possible scenarios. We'd come up with probably 3, 4, 5.
Okay.
6 or 7, but look at all different scenarios, and then it's used in most cases. It's used by organizations.
Okay. And then, Kayo, how about your personal journey? How did you come across the concept of futures thinking, and then like what made you realize now, okay, this is something that I can like probably share to society? And then, lalo na by the looks of it, parang breakthrough batch kayo ngayon. It's like kayo yung pioneer batch to actually do this. O tama ba? Are you like the pioneer batch to do this, or have there been other batches who studied futures thinking and then they're conducting studies now?
Yeah. It's I would say it's not a new field. It's a new field relatively here in the Philippines. There are PhD courses that you can take, but not here in the Philippines. Outside, you can take master's courses. On an academic point of view, Shell, that oil company has already used this since the 1970s when there was an oil crisis.
Okay.
And they said, okay, we don't want to be in this position again. And I think that's one of the factors of success of Shell as a company, where they've really embedded the use of futures thinking. Tesla, for example, futures thinking was part of the conceptualization of that electric vehicle, why they went into that particular segment in the industry. futures thinking played a big role in that. My exposure to this, on a personal basis, I took my formal study when I took my master's in Australia. I took a master's of supply chain innovation in Australia 2 years ago, and I had a really fantastic teacher. He's Australian, but he's one of the foremost futurists in the world. He's a physicist, and he started off in the tech industry. He was in Netscape. I don't know if you know.
Okay. I've heard of Netscape.
Yeah. So this is like the grandfather of Mozilla Firefox and all that. So anyway, so he made me fall in love with that subject, and I said, "Oh, this is what we need. We need this in the Philippines." A lot of Western societies, like in Europe, Singapore has this as part of their government. There is a futures unit in the Singapore government. They don't say anything. They're very quiet about what they do exactly and the studies that they make. But if you want to position yourself as in the cutting edge or in the leading edge of innovation, research and development, even when it comes to civilizational planning, you need futures thinking.
So by the looks of it, like let's define, like, how do we define futures thinking?
Futures thinking, it's really an approach to developing different scenarios of the future based on what's happening in the present. So you're looking at signals, you're looking at all of these things that's happening on the fringes. You can also look at trends and see how these trends will play out. But not, again, as I talked about earlier, it's not just looking at one future, but you're looking at potential futures. And what makes it so relevant at this time is that you will then be prepared to come to, whether in terms of a product or as a company, to become more resilient. In some companies, they normally see it as worst case scenario, right? You've heard of that. Best case scenario, and then the realistic scenario in the middle. In a way, that's one form of it when you talk about financial forecasting or whatever. But then there's also, so you have the data side, but there's also that social side, because not everything can be extrapolated. But on the social side, you're looking at how will people react? How will people behave in the future? If you talk about sports, right? One of the key technologies that's happening now is, for example, robotics and AR, augmented reality, virtual reality, or what they call mixed reality. What will happen if we combine that? And what will happen in the next 10, 20 years when this kinds of technology become more accepted by people, becomes more commonplace? What will happen?
Para na tayo nag-Nintendo Wii nun. Nintendo Wii na na competition na lahat, di ba? Nintendo Wii on steroids yan. Kasi,
exactly.
ang ganon.
Exactly. Like if you've seen the movie Ready Player One, right?
Trailer pa lang. Trailer na kita.
Pero, you should. You should watch it. Yeah, because although, futures thinking, there's a lot of inspiration that gets from science fiction, obviously, whether in books or movies. But of course, that's just one version of the future. There are other versions of the future. So, but yeah, that's an interesting proposition, and it has a lot of implications. That's a simple thing, but right, what will happen now to traditional sports, for example? What will happen to sports as an entertainment, as a form of entertainment, right? What will happen in terms of how, let's say, the big, like organizations like the Olympics or FIFA, etc. What will their role be in defining how sports, just defining what sports will be in the future, where humans are augmented, for example, with other technologies that's happening now. You have brain-machine interfaces, and it's really happening. It's not just a concept anymore. Like Elon Musk, again, founder of Tesla. He has another startup called Neuralink, and they're actually testing. I know.
Parang they're trying to put microchips into people's brains, and then parang like thinking years ahead now. It's either gonna help you understand the human brain better, and then the next phase of that would probably be how the body can regenerate or heal itself using those microchips. I mean, going back to your point, dati nga, who would have thought na esports would be a thing? Diba? Hindi,
I know.
Kahit ako,
right?
Dami ng esports ngayon. Dami ng pera naman ngayon.
Diba? Exactly.
So, and for sure, some people had the vision to foresee these things, and they would actually think that there would be an industry surrounding this idea. So, how would you break down futures thinking to a layman's person? Kasi ako, sabi ko, I read a few articles and I watched a few videos, and it's very, very interesting. That's why I'm super happy that you were able to come over the show. Pero yun nga, like, how do we explain this to the average Pinoy?
Yeah. So futures thinking, actually, it's nothing new, right? Kapag if I speak in, let's say, in Tagalog, right? Ito yung kinabukasan natin. And we always talk about kinabukasan. Sometimes it's a joke, sometimes serious. And pag iniisip natin yung bukas, that's futures thinking. But the main difference and it comes inherent to us. It's natural. We think about what will happen tomorrow, next year. For some people, they even think about what will happen at the end of their lives. Or some families, right? They think of intergenerations that they're working now. Like some of the big families here in the country, minsan business-oriented, no? They think about, what will 3 generations down the line, ano yung ikabubuhay ng family nila. Or even politics, right? But as a field of study where there's discipline related to it, it really is about a systematic way of looking into the future so that you can do something about it in the present. So normally there are 2 types of futures. I forgot which author said that. There's the future of fate and the future of desire. So the future of fate is, things happen which are outside of your control, right?
Okay.
So knock on wood, na-aksidente ka. We have COVID here that's happening. We have, natural disasters. In a way, that's a future of fate. We have no control over it. And the best that we can do is deal with it. But there's also the second type of future, which is the future of desire. So ito yung gusto natin, ito yung pangarap natin sa sarili natin, para sa pamilya natin. And what we want for future thinking is a combination, in a way, of these 2. How can we create the future that we want for ourselves? And, if you take it bigger as, for our country, and even for the world, and that will, I think, spell the level of happiness and success that we have, whether as an individual or as an organization, as a country, even as a race, as humans.
Okay.
Yeah, in most cases, kasi you have, especially let's say for the Philippines, and again, this was my point of view, we've always ascribed to others people's views of the future, like Western views, or the views of the elite or whatever. And again, there's no judgment there. They're both, I would say, good and bad, whatever that may mean, but different consequences. But I do believe that the power of futures thinking is, especially if you can have people to think of their future in a more systematic way, parang that can free us from what's happening here in the present. Because future is not, one next year, tomorrow, next week, a year from now. That's the future. But 10 years from now, 20, 30, 100 years from now, that's also the future. And if you want to do transformational change, let's say in society, then normally it takes around 10 years. Like if you look at Facebook or Google, right? They got their billions user. Not after a year, but after 10 years.
Okay.
So transformation takes a long time. It's 10 years. But if you think about it, it's just 10 years. But you can make such a big difference.
Yes.
Whether on a personal level, like if you look at Franco 10 years ago, right?
Wala, kalat.
Kalat. No. May kanya-kanyang journey naman tayo. But
ngayon, medyo kalat na lang ngayon. Medyo kalat. Pero
but that's probably a very different Franco from the Franco of today. And I always tell my students, think about, think about the Franco of the next 10 years. Where, as early as now, you are empowered. You can already say, okay, this is the Franco that I want to be. Think of the kind of Franco that will be there 10 years from now. It'll be amazing. Amazing, right? So you would probably have done in the past 10 years, done stuff which you never thought would have been possible. And that's your reality now. So think about, the next 10 years, what more you can do, right? What more you can achieve.
So is it like parang lumalabas ngayon, the way I understand it is we take information from the past. Yeah. So that definitely affected the present, and then we're gonna use
the present.
Both. Yep, and the present. Yeah. So we're gonna use the information from both periods in order to assess or like sabihin na nating predict possible scenarios for the future. That's the entire idea of that. So kanina rin parang probably answered my follow-up question like what would be the ideal time period for this. So I mean, so yung sinabi mo na rin is like more or less 10 years. 10 years is like a good number to gauge, diba? So now
that's like the rule of thumb. Of course, it could be much longer than that. Let's say when some organizations they think of 50 years ahead, or some countries they look at 100 years ahead.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, and that for me is pretty amazing. There's this foundation in the US, also founded I think somewhere in California, and they've created a clock, and I think it's going to be launched soon. It's called the Clock of the Long Now.
Clock of the Long Now. Okay.
Yeah, and so you can Google that. And when they define the now, they're talking about the next 10,000 years, and that's and they've made a clock. They've made a clock that's good for 10,000 years. So we are now at 2020. Yeah, 2020. So they're thinking. So imagine what kind of decisions you're going to make in life, or even organizations. If you think about your decisions in the context of the long term.
Kasi parang lumalabas ngayon. This is something, and ito yun everyone is very wary of their future. Everyone is always second guessing how their future is gonna be like, especially during these trying times. Pero the way this conversation is shaping up is like we have to be present with. We have to be aware of what's happening now. Let's look at the trend in the past few years, and then that's probably gonna help us decide how our future is gonna be. Now, I was probably planning on doing certain things. And then, like, kanina lang naisip ko, okay, apparently, some of the things that I was able to do, I was planning, na-achieve ko siya 10 years after. And, yeah, kasi, sakto lang. So, I got...
Sakto lang.
Off by 2 years. So, for example, I was able to do a certain number of kasi I'm a competitor, So I'm into martial arts. I'm into combat sports. So, sakto siya, medyo sumakto siya sa time frame ko. Even me without, I mean, is there an explanation na parang I don't have a timetable. I don't have a specific timetable, kumbaga. I don't have a specific timetable na parang dapat in 2 years magawa ko to in 5 years. Pero I had that. Na parang in 10 years, I should have logged in X number of tournaments. In 10 years, I should have logged in a certain number of international competitions. And then, dapat sabi ko rin noon, in 10 years, makapag-black belt ako. Pero hindi, nag-12 years ako eh. So
Yeah.
I mean, in those...
Pero okay, I mean,
it was within that time frame.
Achieved it still,
Okay.
diba? That's already a major achievement.
Now, if that is possible on the individual level, this is just me. I'm a single person. How do we do that? What are the factors to be considered if we are going to apply this concept on a nationwide level? Like, for example, for us here in the Philippines, do we consider politics, socioeconomic well-being of people, the economic standards, the economic status, yung financial status ng economy and the public, di ba? What do you think are the factors to be considered when it comes to these things? Kasi if 10 years could be the bare minimum, kasi you just mentioned there are countries and organizations that plan 50 to 10,000 years ahead. What about the Philippines na every 6 years nagkakaroon tayo ng change in the political landscape? So how do we apply that concept, and how do we, like, for a family, an individual, or an organization, if they set out a 50-year plan, there's definitely a department or a person who's going to be in charge of the continuity plan. And as you mentioned, there's an organization, or there are organizations abroad who are in charge of that. How do we apply that in the Philippines, wherein in all aspects, politics has a huge role in terms of the continuity of many projects, diba? So sige, yun muna. What do you think are the factors to be considered in order for futures thinking to thrive in the country? Yun muna, and then let's break it down from there.
Yeah. I mean, that's a really big question.
Mm-hmm. Oo nga, kasi parang naisip ko, paano lalagyan
the word
Venus?
question. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But it is a very valid question, and it's really a question worth asking. And that's also a question that we should ask for everyone,
Mm-hmm.
And if I'll try to answer it. I'm not the expert. I would say.
Nagkukwentuhan lang naman tayo dito. Nag-eavesdrop lang yung mga tao sa kwentuhan natin.
Pero may maraming initiatives that's happening currently, especially because of this pandemic. So there's the Philippine Futures Thinking Society that was recently formed. So I'm a member of that. And it's headed by this really, I would say, really committed, very passionate group and very competent group of people who want to spread futures thinking and make it as a driving force for social change. And they're working with different sectors. So one is they're working with the Senate. There is a Senate committee on sustainable development goals, innovation, and futures thinking. So that's headed by Senator Pia Cayetano, and she's really committed to this, and she is getting her other Senate members and other I would say policymakers involved in the process. So she's learning also as much as she can, and listening to different groups of people in different areas, different fields, from education to healthcare and so on. So there's that aspect to it. I know also that, again, there are people, let's say, like in the Development Academy of the Philippines or AIM, where futures thinking is really the capability building for futures thinking is there. So they're offering courses now to people, whether in the government or in the private sector, who want to know more about futures thinking and become what they call futures literate, meaning they know the tools and they think of the future in more systematic ways. So there's also that. particular area. And let's say for my students, they come from different fields of interests and fields of expertise. So we said, when I started the course, kasi it was pre-COVID, and right after our first meeting, we had the quarantine, we had the ECQ, and then in a week's time, I had to shift everything to online. And we were talking about how do we make this relevant? How do we make this subject relevant to the times? And we decided as a class, so there were 60 students, and we decided that we wanted to create a document about possible futures for the Philippines, but cutting across different areas of interest. So each student had their area of interest, and they did the paper. They did a lot of research when it comes to what's happening in the present, in the Philippine context, that they could take into the future and come up with 3 to 4 different scenarios, and without telling, and of course they knew what their preferred scenario was, but our intention was really for it to be a conversation starter so that they can bring it back to their companies, and some have done it, or they brought it to their industries also, and some of them have done that. Others have created, others put it as a key part of their companies. Others have applied it to their own lives as well. Because I have one activity there, similar to what we talked about earlier. Imagine your life 10 years from now, describe that. Okay. And then I tell them, okay, what if that was not an option? Give me an alternative scenario. What would that life be? Assuming that, let's say, if you wanted to be a lawyer, for example, let's say the law profession was no longer possible. Give me an alternative life scenario. So it became quite useful for them to think of a different alternative, and they're not so, because sometimes if you're so intent on one, you become frustrated too, right? So going back to your question, there are different levels that you can approach this, and ideally you should approach it at all levels. You have the societal, regulatory level, where you have the big decision makers, the big institutions, putting in futures thinking as part of their processes when it comes to planning, because normally futures thinking goes into the planning. It's not planning per se, but it feeds into the planning process. It can also be used to feed into, let's say, your innovation process. It can also be used to change organizations. So some organizations have used, it's a form of organizational development where instead of focusing on the problems, let's just focus on our desired future, because yun, mas may common tayo.
Yes.
Like when South Africa, after the apartheid, right? Before segregated, the black and the white. And then they said, okay, we'll integrate. But that was easier said than done, because it was more than the black and whites. I think there were
different tribes.
Yeah, different tribes, different groups, each with their own agenda, each with their own beliefs. And at the beginning, they really couldn't agree. But they actually used the futures thinking, philosophy and approach, and say, okay, instead of fighting about the present, let's talk about 40 years from now. What kind of society do we want? And then that's what they agreed on. And then they took it back to the present and say, okay, if this is the society that we want, what can we start to do now? And it also gives a lot of, I would say, creativity, imagination. It also doesn't give you, at least for me, I'm not so stressed about things, because I know I have that vision for 20, 30 years from now. I know that, because sometimes now, diba, we're so used to getting things instantly.
Yes.
It sort of like fights that and combats that. Now, if we don't have to get things instantly. If you talk about wicked problems like, what some of the stuff that we're dealing with as a country in the Philippines, or even as organizations, right? Traffic. How do you actually solve traffic? And if you're just thinking about solutions that, will be effective in a year, parang you're going to be frustrated because
Mm-hmm.
that, if you ask me, that's not possible. You have to question fundamental things about society, about how cities should be, how our economic systems work, for you to create something. Because for me, it's more than the traffic in a way.
Mm.
It's about how should humans, people live in urban cities, you
Yep.
know, or in whatever you call that concentration of capital and resources
Mm-hmm.
in a specific geographical area. So it begs those bigger questions. So for you to come up with solutions, some solutions you might get results in the short term, but
Mm.
in most cases, like really complex issues, will take time because it took time to actually get us here. Like,
Mm.
200, 300 years ago, wala namang traffic.
Yes, that's true.
But it is a totally different society then. We
Mm-hmm.
sort of brought this upon ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
Like many of the problems that we are dealing with now, we also created.
That's
And we
true.
can also resolve them, right? But we
Mm-hmm.
can't resolve them by using the mindsets of today or the technologies of today.
Mm-hmm.
We can solve them by approaching it in a totally different way.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So
Kasi,
yun. So that's a way to like, you look at it organizational. You look at it also at an organizational level.
mm-hmm.
Like, if you're a member of a society or an organization, then maybe you can start thinking about the future.
Mm-hmm.
And then also at an individual level. So, like a good friend of mine, we've developed a course that combines futures thinking and design thinking for life planning. So how do you, let's design a life for you,
Mm-hmm.
which, the life that you really want.
Okay.
And in that we apply futures thinking, where we think about not just one particular future for you, but several different futures that all excite you.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe you can even, it's really interesting, like what people come out with.
This desired
Out
futures,
of
like
that
what's a
course.
good number? Like what's a desired number? Like for this desired futures, what is like a desirable number? Like 3 possible desires, 5 desirable futures. Like when you
Yeah.
conduct these things, ano yung like what's the sweet spot when it comes to the outcome? Yung possible
Yeah.
outcome.
Yeah. Well, it really depends on the context. So, what are you doing this for?
Mm-hmm.
So, are you doing this for product development, or market development? Are you doing this for your organization?
Mm-hmm.
Normally, you come up with 4 scenarios, but it's not all good. You also look at the worst case scenarios, or
Okay.
like doomsday collapse futures.
Mm-hmm.
Not to scare you, but also to help you, so that when you come up with strategies, regardless of the outcome, your strategies will be adaptive enough and resilient enough that you are able to survive and thrive, even if it becomes, like your worst case scenario.
Mm-hmm.
On an individual level, we normally don't dwell too much on the negative
Oo.
scenarios. There's more
Syempre.
than enough of that. But on an individual level, we look at 3 possible life scenarios,
Mm-hmm.
and 3 totally different life scenarios.
Wow.
So
3.
yeah,
Hirap nun ah. Okay.
yeah, but it's possible. I mean, we've done it with a lot of people. We've tested it with a lot of people already. And normally you will surprise yourself. Let's say if you will take that course, you'll be surprised. You'll surprise yourself in it and say, "Oh, wow, I didn't even consider that."
Mm-hmm.
And then the more you write about it, we actually, in a way, uncover those dreams that you had probably when you were younger, or when we were younger, and some authority figure told us, that won't work, or you're not good enough for that, or you're not worthy to do that. We will actually uncover that in the course. And then you say,
Okay.
and we basically give you permission to say, who who's stopping you? If you want to be, and here we also want, of course there are some things. I cannot be Cristiano Ronaldo.
You have to be realistic.
I'm
Okay.
45, right? I'm 45, or I can't be like, who's the top MMA player now?
Marami. That's John
Yeah.
Jones. Diba? You can't
Yeah,
be John Jones.
For example, I'm 45. I can't be John Jones, right? But there's a difference between output and outcome. And normally this is also done when you're coaching athletes, right? Your output would be, okay, you get that gold medal, you get grand prize. But what is the outcome behind that? What is the real outcome? The outcome would probably be you fought a good fight. You extended beyond what you thought was possible. Or it's for the love of the game, love of the sport, just being able to compete at the high level. That's the outcome. So it might be that, let's say, I can't be the top MMA fighter and win gold. Maybe the chances of that will happen might be really slim. That's the output. But the outcome is I could still be very competitive at my level, right? Fight that good fight and really compete if I choose to. And let's say if I really want to, then I can do. There is still a lot of things within my power to be able to achieve that outcome. So output versus outcome. And what we want to build is, what outcomes do you want in your life? Because at the end of the day, right, the reason why we have, for example, these phones or the nice car, the nice house, that's output. But the outcome is that we want really security and stability for our families, for example. We want to be comfortable. We want to be in a position where we can really be creative and not think about having to do stuff for other people because we need the money, right? So again, that actually makes it easier for you.
It makes more sense. It actually makes more sense. Yeah.
Yeah, correct, right? Because what we're chasing at the end of the day are the outcomes. Whether as an athlete or as a person or even as an organization. Like I'm working now with an organization looking at a new vision, mission, and values for their organization, because they made a major restructuring even before COVID, and then it got compounded by COVID. And you're talking about what is the impact, again, in the context of the mission and vision of the company, their new mission and vision. You're talking about what is the impact really of this organization? What do we want this organization to stand for? So it was more than the money. It was more than market share. It was really about, what will people miss if suddenly tomorrow you had, Thanos-like occurrence, the organization didn't exist. What will society miss? And that's the outcome that they want when they answer that question. So,
now everything is like turning into purpose. Diba? It's like everything that you just said is now you start off with what you're doing right now, but a huge part of why you're gonna think of the future is because you want hindi siya relevance. I think purpose is a much better term to use. Diba? Parang what is your overall purpose, like in terms of outcome? Diba? In terms of outcome, how are you going to be a good contributor to society, and how is your contribution going to affect the landscape of the future? So
it's a really great insight. I never thought of it that way, but that's a really great insight.
Parang it touches on purpose, it touches on legacy. Diba? I mean, how do you want to be remembered? Like the impact, like sabihin natin, I'll die, pero my legacy will always be my students or the stories that I've created, the curriculum that I'll leave behind. Parang ganun diba? So it's a good it's not just a continuity plan pala. Diba? It covers a lot of spectrums. Tapos, do you put any, like, does futures thinking as a whole take into consideration? I think this is because of the Africa story. Like, they take into consideration, like, cultural beliefs, societal beliefs. Diba? Lalo na sa Pilipinas, mapamahiin tayong lahat dito. Lahat ata ng santong pwedeng dasalan, dinadasalan natin.
Correct.
So
yeah.
But does futures thinking have those things to consider?
Yeah, that's a big factor, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's a really big factor. So,
Mm.
so one of the tools or one of the frameworks that we use, it's called causal layered analysis.
Causal layered
And this was a
analysis.
tool that was developed by Sohail Inayatullah. So he's one of the foremost futurists of our time,
Mm-hmm.
and he is basically saying that there are different layers to our reality.
Mm-hmm.
And what we normally see, let's say on the news or on our Facebook feeds and those stuff that really gets us really,
Yung mga conspiracy theories, yung mga
really mad.
Yep.
Also, diba? It's all of this. It's like the litanies. Like if you talk about traffic, if you talk about all these issues, let's say, how COVID, for example, is being handled or whatever, right? There's so many complaints. So that's just the surface. If you go beyond, and then you have, let's say, the scientists or the social scientists, the experts trying to explain, okay, this is because of certain policy, we didn't act fast enough, or we made the wrong decisions, and so on. And then you actually peel that back and say, why did we think that in the first place? So you actually have worldviews, systems, thinking about, again, if I take it back to that example about traffic, right? And cities, problems in cities. Why do, if you look at traffic, why is traffic happening? And explanation could be there's too much cars, not enough infrastructure. We have good urban planning, but we're not just implementing it properly, or maybe structures. And let's say if you talk about Metro Manila, you have so many mayors, but there's no governor, which we used to have. Okay. But then underlying that would be this. It's starting to become cultural, like this whole, and in a way ideology, like this whole concept of having to, why do we need to have so much development in the first place? Like, why do we need to grow this much, in terms of GDP? Why do we have to make money in the first place?
Yep.
So you're starting to question. So, these like prevailing worldviews on capitalism. Again, I'm not a communist, but this whole idea of putting in money so that you can make more money and then make more money, and talking about
the whole money cycle, kumbaga, the whole money cycle.
Yeah, unlimited growth at all costs, right? And the whole idea that if you want progress, you have to have cities and mega cities. But then the deepest part of it, when you talk about metaphors and myths, and you were talking about that earlier, all of these things that we sort of believe in, but we don't really, we sort of take it for granted.
Yeah.
And it sort of becomes, parang it's so deep in our psyche that, so, when you think about it, and that's actually being questioned now, right? Because do we really need to be in a city?
Yes, that's true. I think that's one of the major things.
Yeah. Do we really, are all of these stuff, let's say, that we spend on cars, the nice things, the beautiful things that we spend on, are these really needed to survive and live a happy life? Right? Because let's say with COVID, it made us realize what's really important to us. Family, food, health, right? And everything else, di ba? Kung makikita mo lang dun sa quarantine rules, no? Who are allowed to go out, or which companies or activities are allowed and which are not. All of those which are not, these are the non-essentials.
Yep.
In a way, no? So if you look at it, and then there's also that concept of that idea na pag nasa province ka, you're not as good as a city dweller.
Yes.
Which, no judgment there, but that's a belief. That's that's a metaphor on how we think society is. And in fact, it's not, right? There. If you look at societies before, I'm listening to to this guy. I think this was it this morning or yesterday, and he was talking about you know they're like humans, the way we have evolved. We really what's best for us are really to be like hunters gatherers.
Yep.
Where we would move from one place to another. It's great for our health, in terms of our diet also, because it's a varied diet, but also in terms of mindset. I mean, in terms of society, because he was saying that was his, his idea that, and it was based on what some researchers did, that warfare, the real idea of warfare started when people started to say, okay, this land is mine, okay, and I'm going to stay here.
Yes.
And that's where really warfare started, when people started to make these claims. So, if you think about it, why do we have a society that needs to be just in one place, right? So I'm going. I think I'm going too deep now, or too philosophical.
Di naman, okay lang yun. Kasi everything.
But to answer your question, a big part of future thing is the cultural aspect. So
kasi,
ano yan?
Kasi the way yun nga, like my initial or my introduction to the concept, and then now how you're explaining things, and how this conversation is trying to connect everything is, especially ako naman, and as much as possible, I want to relate all the concepts to the Philippine setting, para at least whoever's gonna watch and listen to this will see the benefit of this concept, futures thinking, to the Philippine setting. Kasi now it's turning out to be a good way to evaluate and reevaluate our processes. Diba? It's from how we think to how we live, and it definitely is challenging preconceived notions. Like, for example, very good point yun, and like if you're a provincial dweller versus a city dweller, laging hindi na nga disconnect, merong discrimination towards that way of thinking, when in fact, if you really dig deeper, you'll realize mas maraming mayayaman sa probinsya. Diba?
That's true.
Diba? Mas marami, I mean, yung mga haciendero nasa probinsya. And the elite families and rich people, they prefer to live in the provinces compared to the city. Kasi so now, which brings into the realization na why do people go to cities naman talaga, diba? It's because people need to work, and work is in the city. So now, I hope this kind of thinking will help, like, future urban developers, na parang kahit ako kasi, when I have dinner conversations with my relatives or my mom, I'm like, hindi ko maintindihan why, what do you call this? Why there are little industries. Kasi ako, I love to travel, di ba? And then, it led me to become a travel writer. When I go to the province, I see huge pieces of land. Parang sabi ko, ang dami pa ng lugar dito. Ba't lahat ng tao sa Maynila? Di ba?
And for me, that's in a way the real Philippines.
Yes, that's true. I agree. 100%.
Countryside. This one, my background.
Oh. I'd rather live there. Di ba? I'd rather live there.
This is El Nido. Diba? This is an island.
Okay. Anong island yan? We went to El Nido rin eh.
Yeah. It's a picture I took. So
San Miguel Corporation, they're a very big company, and they're spearheading several projects. So and they're building more roads and they're building a lot of roads actually. They're part of that whole NLEX and SLEX plan. And these are things that are not being emphasized on media rin. So mamaya may tanong ako dyan. So diba, there's SLEX 3, 4, 5 na. Diba? And SLEX and SETEX, hanggang Naga na pala yun, di ba? So at least these are very good projects that will connect not only yung provinces to the city, but if there are roads, I really believe that if there are more roads, there's more opportunity to build industries in the provinces. Like for example, in Bulacan, they're planning to build an airport there. So definitely, hindi na lahat, kasi pati mga taga Bulacan sa Maynila nagtatrabaho. Mga taga Laguna sa Maynila nagtatrabaho. So I really think that this is something that we should all look at. And ayun, I'm happy to hear that there are companies here in the Philippines who have that. Ang pinaka-concern ko lang is if we want to implement something like this, and I think we really should, ang pinaka-hurdle lang would be the time frames and who is gonna be in charge. Pero at least, ayan, di ba? At least ayan, the Senate is siguro in aid of legislation, or I mean, for example, natapos yung term ni Senator Pia, sino kaya magtutuloy, di ba? Yan yung problema natin, di ba?
That's right. And again, and for me, the question is up to us also. And of course, I might sound like, really too optimistic. But if you can't start with yourself, right? I mean, how do you expect the government? And, I'm not defending it or anything, but of course, government has their role and responsibility. But for me, the role and responsibility of government is really to protect the citizens, right? Make sure that basic services are there, people are protected, they feel safe, and so on. But aside from that, if there are problems, why do we have to wait for government to actually solve it for us? Why don't we solve it? We find a way. Instead of just relying on others and so on. So, but again,
I agree with that.
That's scary, and for people and to be confronted with that. Naintindihan ko din. Bakit ako? Hindi ko naman kaya ako nagbabayad ng taxes para ma-solve yan. But if you think about it, cities are coming together, how people are working together, right? How people who have lost their jobs are trying to change and in a way pivot and look at other sources of income. And they're forced to be innovative, right?
Yes.
So for me, it starts with us also. And really questioning why we do what we do. Because if you look at it, do we really need as a country, of course, Philippines is part of the world also, so there are also some things that we have to be accountable for. But some people have thought of the idea of universal basic income, right? Probably heard of that.
Yeah.
Where with all of these technologies that's happening and the abundance that goes with it, if robots do the work that we are doing as humans, then we probably don't need to work anymore, right? So what do we do? And maybe we could use that now as an opportunity to really explore our humanity, right? The full potential as humans, being creative and expressing that creativity. I mean, if I relate it back to sports, imagine if we had universal basic income or universal basic food, because actually there's more than food for everyone. It's not just the supply chains are really just again we designed it that way. Not blaming anyone. Yeah, but if you think about it, there's more than enough food, and if we plant, let's say, like what some cities are doing, where they have urban gardens or urban farms that are run by cooperatives, they're run by communities. We might not have that salmon from, Norway or the Angus beef from Australia, but we can have, our fruits and vegetables and local native chickens and, whatever too. And they're healthy. We know what we put into them. So, but again, so if we relate it back to sports, let's say we do have universal basic income, what will the role of sports be? And I think that will be really cool, in terms of a sports thing, where we use now sports as really a channel for human
interaction and human expression.
Correct, like reaching your fullest potential as a human being, where some people would say, oh, I can't go to the gym because I have to work, I can't do this, now what if, let's say, we don't have to work anymore? Then you can really be, full on 100%, 110% of your time you can concentrate, let's say, of being an athlete, explore, like break that boundary of human limitations.
Yeah, I've heard of, I've read or I've heard of Seth Godin answer that question, and parang in the period of people automating things, and people are trying to automate all processes, and we're doing, and diba, yun yung pinaka-fear, what if robots will replace human processes or manual intervention? So that was his plain answer, diba? If there's more automation, then there's more time to create art. There's more time to express yourself, and the moment you express yourself in a very artful way, it's more honest, it's more unique. That is something that cannot be replicated or duplicated. That's uniquely yours. Then you can earn from it. So parang ako sabi ko, tangan, ang galing nun ah.
I mean on a practical perspective, you look at the combination robotics, Internet of Things, which are the sensors, you have big data, you have artificial intelligence. And let's say you apply that to the agricultural supply chain. Example lang ah.
Yep.
Again, we have bits and pieces of that's happening currently. So for example, you have farms now which are handled mainly by robots, a combination pa rin of human and robots. But what if, let's say, it was pure robots, and you had data which would allow you to be able to forecast potential issues, and that gets fed into, let's say, this algorithm that will adjust, let's say, how you're going to water, the kind of pesticides that you're going to put in. So in a way, you sort of reduce human intervention when it comes to agricultural systems, and assuming those systems are also made sustainable, right? Where you use only you don't burn the soil because of much what we call that pesticides and fertilizers. And then you have, let's say, robots moving that stuff from the farms going into these I would say also local production sites, where you have let's say the cows, and I've been to like a dairy farm somewhere in Australia, where of course there are still humans there, but the cows, in terms of timing of when is the best time to milk, etc., they have like sensors.
May system na,
yeah, may systems na. But imagine, let's say, if that becomes fully automated, and then you have your, let's say, your smart, let's say we still have homes, and our smart homes are able to get the stuff that we need even before we think about it.
Yep.
Like
that, yung mga smart fridge.
Exactly. Like, the AI controlling the smart fridges will order the milk and order it through the AI of, let's say, the dairy farm, and then we'll bring it to and then using driverless vehicles or whatever, and that's already being piloted also in San Francisco, UK, Australia, where you have these robots that look like big big containers, tapos nandun na yung mga items, and even within the home you can have like these small robots. And let's say you have a system where it's seen as like a cooperative system where everyone gains out of all of this, so they sort of get they don't have to think about working anymore. It's a little bit different from the capitalist system where just one person who thought of the idea will make the most out of it. But I don't know what could be a suitable, let's say, institution or mechanism to make that happen. So you don't need to, or if let's say your fridge also talks to the sensors in your tummy, for example, and before you're hungry, or let's say you're missing a certain nutrient, you open your fridge and it's gamified and it tells you, like, you have your glasses or your special lenses, and it tells you what food would be great to eat and the food that you need to eat, and then you get your points. You don't really need, in that sense, you don't really need work anymore. So what do we do, right? So it's quite exciting if you put it in that
it's
way.
like it's like the good Black Mirror episode. Yun yung
exactly.
Ano yun eh. Para siyang magandang Black Mirror. And then where do you factor something like COVID into the equation? Kasi for sure pre-COVID you were all discussing all these concepts and then plotting out scenarios. Then all of a sudden something parang si COVID yung yung uninvited party pooper, di ba? Parang bigla na lang, hey, what up, everybody? Di ba? So how do you equate that into futures thinking? Kasi in as much as people have the information about it, syempre there are other factors that come into play, and then yung from government reaction to institutional reaction, how does it, kumbaga, kasi feeling ko if you have something plotted out based on the past and today, then ito yung parang hindi mo this is the unexpected variant. How does it factor into the equation? How do you prepare for something like this?
Yeah. So that's a very good question and very great insight. What's COVID? Some people would say this totally caught them unaware. Some people would call it like a black swan event, where it's something that's out of your vision, peripheral vision, and it blindsides you, and you're caught, totally caught unprepared. But futurists would actually say no. There was a study that was done as an academic journal in 2004, and saying that we're due for another pandemic.
Wow.
A global pandemic. And they were using the SARS example, the first SARS, which hit China, Hong Kong, if you remember. I think that was early 2000. I think it was around that time too, right?
So it was SARS, Bill Gates' speech at TED Talk, tapos reinforced by Obama's and George Bush's speech as well. So
So actually, that's one of the things that we shouldn't be
surprised,
not be surprised about, because that's something that should have happened. And some might even call it like even the Simpsons sort of predicted this global pandemic, right?
Ako naniniwala ako nagsulat ng Simpsons alien kasi, or may time machine yan taong yan. Halos lahat na predict niya eh.
Fantastic. But they also have this other one called Futurama, which I love. Diba? And it's about the future, and so interesting how they see society then. So then there's also that concept of black elephants. And I think in the Philippines, we have a lot of black elephants. So when we talk about that elephant in the room, right, everyone knows about it, but no one wants to talk about it.
Okay.
Right? No one wants to face it. So a black elephant is like that. We know things are wrong, but we refuse to face it or address it.
Okay.
Right? So, if you just talk about our sewage system, going back to the city, right? This is, I don't know, probably there are initiatives to actually improve, our sewage system in the cities. but we know that this is one cause for flooding,
Yes.
right? And we always have floods year by year. So if you think about it, this is, or I think there was a study that was done that Manila is actually um, uh, going going down,
Yes.
like a few
A
centimeters
few centimeters each year, ba?
each year, right? Like not everyone knows it, but a lot of people are probably aware of this. But
Yep.
so if you
Yeah,
think
they
about
don't
the
talk about
future,
it, di ba?
right,
Di ba?
it's happening now.
Mm.
It's not an issue now, but 20 years, 30 years down the line, it's going to be a big problem.
Mm.
It will
That's true.
exacerbate flooding. So for me, that's an example of a black elephant. That things can possibly go wrong,
Mm-hmm.
and it will, because let's say the processes are weak or the mechanisms are weak, but we're just not dealing with it for one reason or another. So I think, going back to your COVID question, yes, that this was foreseen. And I think that's where the challenge is of futures thinking,
Mm-hmm.
as a discipline is, okay, we talked about it.
Mm-hmm.
We've talked about a lot of things, let's say, tonight, and maybe our listeners, our audience will hear about it and say, oh, yeah, that's interesting, that's good. But we don't change anything. We don't do anything about it. Then that's, for me, in a way, both if I'm going to be critical about futures
Mm-hmm.
thinking, that's one limitation. Like we need action also.
Yes.
But that action, that's not the scope of, in a way, futures thinking anymore, at least the way I know it. That's
Mm-hmm.
where, let's say, strategic planning comes in, execution
Mm-hmm.
comes in. So, di ba, parang naman, let's say, people who smoke. Nothing against smokers, but
Mm.
but it's bad for you, right?
Yes. Uh-uh.
But we still do. So there's that
Yung pa naman yung
aspect of
ano,
decision
yung pa
making
naman yung
as well.
follow-up question ko eh. Parang my next question would be, we have this in place. We will have these discussions. We're going to plot out possible scenarios from your desires down to like the worst case scenario. How do we implement them? 'Di ba? Yun sana yung tatanong ko eh. What's the is there like an implementation plan, or meron bang does futures thinking follow certain guidelines that will help or guide people into implementing these discussions, or kung ano man yung pinag-usapan nila?
Yeah.
Diba?
I think meron naman. Like, there are
Mhm.
practitioners who specialize in that. When you talk about let's say, that difference between futures thinking and, let's say, strategic foresight. Strategic foresight, it's more of the application of the research or the tools in futures thinking, or the ideas in futures thinking, and applying it in a specific context.
Mhm.
As I talked about earlier, about
Mhm.
making an organization more competitive in the long run, or making, let's say, a government do its job better in terms of protecting its citizens,
Mhm.
and making sure that their citizens are safe and healthy, and so on. So there are people and consultancy companies who specialize in that as well.
Mhm.
But that already goes towards really the execution side, which
Mhm.
futures thinking is not part of. Not to
Okay.
say that we shouldn't, let's say, if you're a futures thinking practitioner,
Mhm.
that doesn't mean that you won't do anything anymore.
Mm.
That's I think that's the crucial part that needs to happen. That you might have all of these wonderful plans.
Mhm.
Um, I mean, first, you have all of these, scenarios of the future. I hope that gets translated into a plan,
Mhm.
which becomes executed, you know,
Mhm.
uh, implemented well.
Mhm.
But that's a lot of things to ask
Yung
for,
nga, there's like, hindi, it's
right?
parang it's parang it's asking too much at such a short time eh. So now at least we have a basic understanding of what it is, and I mean from an individual's perspective, there are a lot of things that you can do, and apparently, diba, change starts with you. Diba? Diba, if you want the bigger picture change begins with the individual. So at least now, I think futures thinking will reinforce that. Now, as someone who's studying and who's doing his best to promote this idea, not just in the private sector, but hopefully the public gets a better understanding of this. And ano yun, initial steps? What would be good initial steps for people to undertake in order to accept this concept? Like yung, kasi sasabihin, everyone said, alam ko naman kung anong gusto kong mangyari, eh. Di ba? Ano bang basic questions na dapat tanungin in order to have a better future, kumbaga?
Wow, that's deep, man.
Oh. Diba? Kasi everyone has a good idea na parang they want this, diba? We all want something eh. We all want something. Pero futures thinking helps you break it down eh. I mean, the way I'm understanding it now is if you have a set of questions and then it breaks it down, parang it will make you realize that what you wanted when you were a kid is no different from what you want right now. Diba? And it's looking at the bigger picture. So at least, ayan, like for someone who's studying this and wants to promote this, like how do we, like siguro like what do we ask ourselves? You know, what do we ask ourselves in order to to be motivated, kumbaga, to act better or to be better tomorrow?
Yeah, actually, that's really a tough question.
Yeah.
Because bawat tao may pangangailangan,
Yes.
May pinagdadaanan.
I mean, kasi like what we've been discussing, a lot of the things, exactly, it's the black elephant in the room. I mean, we all know what to do. We have an idea of what to do actually, pero yun nga, I think the need supersedes that eh. Parang, yeah, I think we should obey the law, pero hindi. And ako marami akong reklamo sa Philippine society. There's always that need to be first. Kailangan hindi ka pwedeng hindi magpalamang. Kailangan ikaw yung mauna. Pwede kang sumingit, sisingit ka. Diba? I see a lot of the problems as a nation is cultural and social. A lot of people think it's political or it's financial, pero para sa akin kasi a lot of it is cultural and social. Na tipong I've been very asswipey and douchey about this, na para ako, if you want the government to follow suit or if you want the government to fall in line, 'di ba? Kung gusto niyo sundan kayo ng gobyerno or kung gusto niyo maging matino yung gobyerno, kailangan maging matino muna tayong lahat. Kasi for me, it starts with the basic human being, which is the unit of measurement ng society, and then eventually, or hopefully, it trickles up. Kasi nga, exactly, yung sinabi mo kanina, everyone expects the government to do everything. And for us, in the bottom, it's easy for us to blame the government. Diba? It's easy for us to blame whoever's in authority kasi we don't want to take accountability. But if we reverse the situation, it starts with you. Diba? You're accountable to yourself and to your surroundings. Every good deed that you do will hopefully trickle up kasi it's either mapipilitan na yung gobyerno or mahihiya naman sila na yung mga nasa ilalim nila matitino, sila hindi. Diba? So at least, ayun, I really think that this is something that we all should learn and dig deeper. So at least, ayan.
Yeah. So to answer your question, I have a few questions siguro. So, for me, the first question is, kasi may kanya-kanyang pinagdadaanan nga tayo, di ba? So, there are some na who just think of ano talaga yung ngayon, di ba? Ano yung papakain ko sa pamilya ko bukas? Kasi wala akong trabaho, di ba?
Yes.
Wala akong, let's say, kung may business ka, no? Matutuloy ko ba yung negosyo ko? Or will I ever open my business again? Or, what will I do now because my business, I've closed my business? Ano nang pwede kong gawin, di ba? So, kumbaga meron yung iba talaga survival mode.
Yes.
And then there are some naman who are probably luckier, or they're in different circumstances, and they look at more of the year. Okay, sige, anong target ko this year? Makasurvive lang ako this year. I'm surviving. Basta maitawid ko lang to, then that's good. So that's their, kumbaga, yung length nila of the future. And then there are some people naman who think of the next 5 years. So let's say yung mga boss ng mga organization, they think of, let's say, okay, what will I do for the next 5 years for my investors in my company, for my shareholders, or let's say ikaw nagpapaaral ka, di ba? Gaano pa katagal ba para ako magbabayad ng tuition, ganyan. So, there's that longer term. And you think about now certain achievements. Gusto ko magkabahay, gusto ko magkaroon ng pamilya, and so on. So, but there are some people who really think of it in the long term. Sinabi mo kanina, ano yung legacy ko? Ano yung gusto ko iwan sa mundo? And these things, they're not exclusive to each other. They're actually connected all to each other. Na it's possible na isang tao or isang company, they can think through all of this at the same time, Ang importante lang is yung alignment. So for example, if you're in a job now, you ask yourself, if importante yung that vision at the end, yung sabi mo nga, yung legacy, or some people call it the North Star, or their vision for themselves. I think very important yun, because it starts from there. So let's say, if I were that business owner now and I'm struggling and, I don't know what to do, that's okay. Do what you can to make your business survive today. Or kung alam ba, ikaw yung family person, ikaw yung magulang or yung breadwinner, hindi mo alam kung paano mo, sige, okay lang, go and try to survive until the next day.
Yep.
But don't forget the future. Don't forget that legacy, that North Star, that purpose in your life. Because that will take you through what's happening today.
Yep.
Kasi kung, I don't know kung nabasa mo yung Man's Search for Meaning kay Viktor Frankl.
Diba?
He was that guy who survived the concentration camps for the Jews. That was, he survived that. He lost most of his family members, loved ones, and grabe, horrific yung pinagdaanan niya. More than, a lot of us now. But yung main reason why he was able to survive was really, he found that meaning in his life. He was able to answer that, ano yung purpose niya. And I think importante yun. That's one important question that we can ask ourselves, as an individual, but also if you're your company or you have an organization that you're leading, what are you here for? Because that will help you survive the jungle of the present and, the competitive landscape moving into the future. So that also helps you to sort of relax a little bit. Not to say less effort, but sort of relax a little bit and, be more patient with yourself and saying, okay, you might not be getting the results today, but my vision of the future is this. And as long as I'm moving forward one day at a time, then that's all right. So importante yun. But then I think second is asking, being more critical of what we believe in. I think that's one.
Yes.
If you think about it, everything, lahat ng nasa mundo ngayon, the buildings, the chair that we're sitting on, yung t-shirt na suot natin, tong headset, etong Zoom call, all of this was at one point was a figment of the imagination, right? And this started off as an idea. The good things as well as the not so good things. Pollution, traffic, this state of the world where you have the rich people becoming more rich, and then you have the poor people that are really left for themselves to survive, and they're barely surviving. these are all created, whether on purpose or not, no? And so we actually have the power to make a difference there. Ang question lang is, ano yung contribution natin, di ba? Ano yung pwede nating magawa? So, you know, we can answer that question in different ways. So if you're a businessman with a big company, then you can make, you know, you can probably affect all of those people that work for you in the industry that you're in. But let's say if you're a family member, just by helping your family, you're already making a big difference. So kanya-kanyang sphere of influence yun. So I think that's the second one. You know, first is, you know, what is your, knowing what your purpose is and making sure that everything that you like with that purpose. And then the second one is what can you do to actually move things, being critical of what's happening today, and then asking yourself, what can you do to move forward? Sabi mo nga, don't rely on others. Do something na pwedeng makatulong now instead of just complaining or being a keyboard warrior. And I think the third aspect also is, you know, let's talk about our future. Because normally, although you said earlier, alam ko naman kung anong gagawin mo. Really? Have you actually written it? Sinulat mo ba talaga yan? Nakasulat ba yan? And the other thing, shinare mo ba yan? Shinare mo ba yan sa loved ones mo? Shinare mo ba yan sa kapamilya mo? Or if you're the boss, in your team, or or let's say you're the president of the company. Do you think everyone shares your vision for the company? You know, I would probably challenge that and say, maybe not. Sino sa atin na nakapagsulat ng, okay, this is what I want my life to be. Ito ang plano ko sa buhay, di ba? I'm sure meron dyan, ano? But if you look at majority, wala, di ba? And then they complain, ang dami kong pinagdadaanan ngayon, lahat problema. Because what happened is, you didn't make any plans, and I always believe that, kung hindi ka nagplano para sa sarili mo, ibang tao ang gagawa ng plano para sa'yo.
That is so true. Oh, totoo yan.
Yan. So for me, yun yung siguro tatlo na pwedeng itanong, di ba? Ano yung purpose ko? Ba't ako nandito? Sabi mo nga, legacy. Pangalawa is be critical. Kumbaga, bakit ba nangyayari itong mga to? And then, do something about it in your own way. No? And then, third is, you know, pag-usapan natin. You know, di ba you just cancel people out because, you know, ano yan, pro someone, you know, just because nanggaling sa kanya, for example, masama na kaagad, we shut them down without really listening. Or maybe forwarding, it can also be the other way, that we forward something just because it comes from something, pero hindi natin binasa yung buong article. And it's more just inciting people to become more divisive and
That's
just
true.
saying, dahil mas magaling ako, or ako na unang nakapag-share nito. Pero iniisip mo, di ba? Ano bang outcome yung gusto natin mangyari? Is it to say na I'm better than you? Or nakalamang ako? Sabi mo nga. Ganun ba yung gusto nating society sa atin? So, importante to. Like this podcast, I think is very important. You know, for more people to share in I would say in a good way, yung hindi yung nambabastos or nangpapahiya, but really have this yung conversations about our future and sharing our ideas of the future. So yeah.
Okay, let's wrap it up with that. Thank you so much, Jose Decolongon. Where can people find you? And hopefully people can, when all of this is over, people can attend your classes.
Yeah, well, I have online courses. So again, they're online classes at AIM. And then I also work with the Australia-New Zealand Chamber of Commerce. So we also offer future thinking courses there. So you can reach me. I have my Twitter account at PHFutureThink. That's my Twitter handle. I have an Instagram also, so at PHFutureThink. and have my LinkedIn and my Facebook. So you can also find me there. Just my name. Yeah. So it's great to be here, by the way. Thank you very much.
I learned a lot today. Super thank you.
Question mo.
Yeah, super thank you. I love it.
Actually, I have a lot more when it comes to sports. Questions about how technology will affect the future of sports. If you talk about bionics, if you talk about AI, there are stuff now that's happening like robot combat league, for example.
Parang narinig ko nga yun. Sige, let's make an episode about that one. Gawa tayo nun. Ako, gusto ko yun.
Yeah. Like literally, like the future of sports. What's out there. Like if you combine data analytics with sensors, how will that result to, what kind of athletes are we going to get, everything is so...
May part 2 na tayo with may part 2 na tayo with you.
Right, di ba? AI, algorithms, they can be the next coaches, right? So it will be an AI coach versus an AI coach.
Parang hirap, parang pangit naman.
But that will change in a way the game.
Oh, definitely.
Or if you talk about mga brain-machine interfaces where you can, upload, you have your exoskeletons and you're integrated with like the Matrix. Imagine that. You can still have that competition, right?
Yes.
You can have like Neo versus what is
parang ano ka na talaga, parang living in a video game ka na nun.
Yeah. Imagine a world where everything is gamified.
Wow.
Fantastic.
Wild yun. Sige. Okay.
Yeah, but I'd love to have that conversation.
Oh yeah, we will. Ako gusto ko yan. Okay, we'll end it with that. Thank you so much for listening and watching. And with that, that's what Coach Franco says. Bye-bye.
Coach Franco Says would like to thank the following sponsors for making this episode possible.
Be in the moment. Have that faceless emotion. Beware the robot face. I am Knots and Crosses. Place your orders on their Facebook and Instagram pages. Community and culture. Just good vibes in the local jiu-jitsu scene. Visit Ikiro Collective at ikiro.ph. Simply Better Dentistry, the best dental service in the heart of Makati. Visit the Santos Dental Group and Oral Surgery Center. Book an appointment on their Facebook page. Get rid of bacteria and viruses. Get Nano Silver Immune Support Supplement. Order your bottles on their Facebook and Instagram pages. Coach Franco Says is partnered with Ambidexter, a digital content marketing company. They offer graphic design, content writing, media relations marketing, and many more. Visit their website for more details. For local martial arts news here in the Philippines, visit Local MMA on Facebook and listen to one of my favorite podcasts, Destroy MNL. So that's it, everyone. I hope you enjoy listening and watching to this episode as much as I enjoyed doing it. I hope I get to have Gile again in future episodes. So that's it, everyone. Bye-bye.